she had said to her parents that she was being held on board against her will. She said that she wanted to leave and she'd been told she couldn't leave. Hi, welcome back to the podcast. This is podcast number 5. It's been a few weeks since I did a podcast, actually. It's been so busy that I haven't even really noticed the time that has elapsed since the previous one, but here we are anyway. Now, what I want to do is I want to introduce a new section for the podcasts, whether we'll do it every week or every time we make a podcast. I think we probably will. And it's basically answering some questions that have come up from YouTube videos. I had some interesting questions come up. Now, most of these are based loosely around the subject of the most recent feature video, which is, I think at the moment it's called No Pay for 4 months. When we don't get enough views, we might change the title of a video after we've posted it, just to see if it increases the popularity of that video. So we've done that. So that's why I said at the moment it's called No Pay for 4 months. Anyway, the video is talking about the yachting industry, working in the industry, kind of explaining how the process goes from looking for a job to going on board and spending your first day on board and stuff like that. What it's like, how you get there, the logistics of it, stuff like that. But it's done in a funny way with some stories about things that have happened to me in my time at sea, and also, just some humor in there. So it might sound a bit boring, but it's actually a funny video. So if you haven't seen it, I'll put a link in the description in the top corner here. If you're watching on YouTube, in the description on YouTube. If you're watching on, or if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, then if I can put a link, I will. If not, then just go to the Eastman Superyachts channel and it's the feature. Anyway, one of the questions that came up, I didn't write down the people's names, unfortunately, but it says, very interesting. I might like working on a yacht. What positions are there for a 70-year-old plus? LOL. Well, there's a chief stoker or crow's nest lookout. Obviously, these are old positions that no longer exist. Actually, my grandfather was a chief stoker. Stoker was somebody who put coal into the fires to keep the engines going. Anyway, interestingly, when I worked in the cruise ship industry, I was just talking to my partner about it because she also worked in the cruise industry, and I couldn't remember the name of the position that I'm going to talk about, but she remembered it. But on there, that we had these elderly men who worked there. They were called gentlemen hosts, and they were actually employed by the cruise line, and they came on board and stayed on board. And if you had like widows who came on, or single women who were older in their 60s or whatever, these gentlemen hosts would chat to them in the ballrooms and dance with them if they wanted to dance and stuff like that. And that was their job. So the sole job on board was gentleman host, which I always thought was quite funny. So not funny, but funny. But it was quite charming in a way, because it's like these men were very well dressed in the tuxedo and that, and very polite. They knew how to treat women without in a respectful way and stuff like that. But it was a really cool thing. But these men were all in their 60s or whatever. I don't know how you get a job like that. I've never seen one advertised, but anyway, we had them. So I thought that was quite funny. Now, next question, which is a more serious question, is if you're employed on a yacht, what employment laws apply from which country? Now, it's quite straightforward. The flag state, so whichever flag the vessel is flying, those are the laws that you work by in general. So now, that does not mean, so for example, most of those flags, you'll never go to the place where the flag is, right? So Cayman Islands, maybe you'll go to Cayman Islands, on one occasion on that vessel. But the most likely scenario is that the flag that your vessel is flying, you're not going to be there, right? So you're going to be in another country. So you'll probably be in Europe, or you'll be in the Caribbean. So if your vessel is Cayman Islands or Malta, and you're in France or somewhere else, there are laws that override the laws that apply to that flag state. So in terms of human rights and things like that, they can't mistreat you because if your flag state was from, I don't know, some made up country where it says it's okay to beat people with a stick, and you're in France, they're not allowed to beat you with a stick in France because their employment laws apply, right? It doesn't work like that. So the employment laws will be in effect in terms of your ability to sue if you feel like you've been unfairly dismissed and stuff like that. But if they try to mistreat you, then you still have, if you're, like I said, if you're in Europe, you still have recourse based on the laws of the countries that you're in at the time. So, and I'm going to go into that a little bit more. There's a follow-up question that's going to explain a little bit more about that. But before I go into that, I wanted to tell a quick story about something that happened in terms of that question. So about the employment laws. Now, I was working on a cruise ship. This is probably 20 years ago, at least, maybe longer. So it would be in the early noughties, as they call it, between 2000 and 2010. And I was on the bridge. It was about 11:30 at night. And we received a phone call, which, you don't get many phone calls, external phone calls. I mean, we get phones ringing all the time, inside, like on board the vessel from reception or whatever. But you don't get many phone calls that come in from the outside. And when they do, they ring differently. So you know before you answer it that it's an external call. Anyway, I answered this call, and it was from, I don't remember exactly now. It might have been like the Coast Guard or search and rescue center, somewhere like that. It was an authority. But basically what had happened is there was a young girl on board. She was working on board. I think she might have been working in a restaurant or housekeeping. I don't remember exactly. She had said to her parents that she was being held on board against her will. She said that she wanted to leave and she'd been told she couldn't leave. Now, it sounds like, I mean, I never got the full story, but it sounds like nonsense to me. But I'll explain why. I'll explain what happened first. So anyway, I took the call. I quickly contacted the captain. Like I said, it was very late at night, so the captain would have been sleeping most likely. He came onto the bridge. I explained to him briefly on the call to him that what was being said. He came quickly, dealt with it. And then he got in touch with the crew purser, and then they dealt. And the next day we got into port, and the girl was taken off the ship, disembarked, and then sent home. She was bought a flight and sent home. Dealt with very quickly. Now, that was as much detail as I ever got in that story. And but for whatever reason, she told her parents she was being held against her will. Now, I know that was nonsense because I was working on the same vessel, right? And I know she probably was just inexperienced, very young, and she didn't really know how to just say, I want to go home. It's also possible that a head of department, if she went to a head of department, let's say she's in housekeeping, she goes to a head of housekeeping, says, look, I want to leave. And maybe their head of housekeeping has said, look, we can't lose you right now. Maybe you could stay till the end of the month, or maybe you can stay until we find the replacement, something like that. Maybe she got a story like that. And then she felt like she was being forced. She didn't want to stay, but she said, okay. But then she felt afterwards like she wished she hadn't. I don't know. I'm just making up a story that sort of fits in the situation. And maybe that's what happened. So then she tells her parents that she wanted to leave, but they wouldn't let her, maybe. And then the parents call the police. The police get in touch with the port authorities, maybe. I don't know who. I don't remember exactly who it was who called. It was somebody like from the authorities, like maybe Coast Guard or something. And she was removed immediately. She was the next moment we were in port, boom, she was off the ship and she was sent home. So the employment laws were such that you have to repatriate somebody. You can't dump somebody off in a foreign country and then leave them there and say, right, okay, here's your final salary, go home. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, actually. So in actual fact, the next question is, this is on the latest video, is that when you're brought on as crew, are your flights to the yacht covered. What about flights back home? I know this is normally the case on the cruise ship crew, but curious to know about yachts. Well, the reality is that if you work on board a vessel, they are required by law, by maritime law, that they have to repatriate you to your country of origin or wherever your abode is. When you sign up, they'll ask you what's your home port or what's your home airport. And if I say London, then they have to send me back to London when my trip is over, or even if they fire me, like they still have to repatriate me. They can't just dump you in, in South Africa and say, right, you make your own way home. It doesn't work like that. So now, if I have heard of people, I have heard of stories where people have contacted us here at the channel and said that they were that very thing happened to them. It's illegal. No yacht is allowed to do it. And what I would say is, if you're ever on a yacht and they try to dump you in a port and they don't give you a ticket home, or if they don't pay your final salary, like sometimes they might say, we'll pay your final salary, but you don't get it immediately, right? You don't get it the day you leave. They don't pay you in cash. It's put into your bank account. But if they imply that they're not going to give you your final pay, or they put you in a port with your suitcase and they don't give you a ticket home, go to the harbour master's office in that harbour, wherever you are. It might be called something else if you're in a foreign country. It might be called a capitaniere. Anyway, the harbour master's office. Go to the harbour master's office and tell them that the vessel that you were working on has dumped you in the port. They've not given you a flight home, and you need them to deal with it. Now, the harbour master will arrest that vessel. He will prevent that vessel from leaving, and they will tell them that you must repatriate that person. You can't leave them in our country, right? So if you're let's say you're from New Zealand and they dropped you off in Monaco, and they say you're out of here, and they leave you, they'll arrest the vessel, and the vessel won't be allowed to leave until they buy you a ticket home, right? So that is how it works in terms of flights, and nobody should ever be dumped like that, regardless. Even if they might try to tell you a story that because you fired and because you're within a month, let's say you just started and you've only been there 3 weeks, they can't do it. I'll give you an example for that as well. I was on a yacht, and we were in a refit in Germany, and a girl was hired. She was from New Zealand. She might have been from Australia. She was from down that way. She was already in Germany. I don't know why, but she probably came off another boat or something. But she was in Germany. She got hired by the boat. She stayed on board. Well, we weren't even on board. We were in apartments because the boat was in refit. She was employed for 5 days, and then she resigned, and they had to fly her home. So she did it for a flight home. I'm pretty sure she did. She just wanted a flight home, so she signed onto the yacht and then quit. And they flew her home. So even in that situation, the boat did the right thing. They had to do it by law, even though she kind of like used it. She abused that situation. She knew that would happen. But that's the like I said, for the people who think that the yacht has any legal reason to not fly you home, they don't. So just know that for future reference if you're ever in that situation. I mean, it's kind of a last resort to arrest a vessel, but like I said, if you're standing on the quayside with your suitcase and you got no money because they didn't pay you yet, right? Because if they don't pay you in your hand, they pay you into your bank, and if it's not been long enough, like let's say you got employed there and you've been there 3 weeks and you haven't been paid and you got no money, then for sure do that. But like I said, if you're ever in that situation, I wouldn't hesitate to do that. Actually, I would go and find the harbour master and tell them what's happened, because you do have rights, And I know stories of boats that have been arrested. In fact, the yacht Sarafsa, a number of the crew there, they filed a court case. They filed a lawsuit in court against that vessel in Antibes in France. I don't know whether the vessel was ever arrested there, but they did it because that was its home port. So you can do it. It's exceptionally rare, but it does happen. And the reason why those people sued, the crew members sued, was because of not being paid, right? Now, if you've seen the most recent video, the feature that I did, one of the stories I told in there is that we didn't get any pay for 4 months. Well, I didn't get any pay for 4 months, and some of the crew hadn't been paid for 6 months. Now, I spoke to a crew member fairly recently who still worked on that boat. I'm not sure if he still works there now, but he still worked on the boat, and he told me that he was up to 6 months. So he hadn't been paid for 6 months, which is quite outrageous. Um, and people, there was quite a few comments there saying, why would anyone stay that long? Because, you would just leave if you don't get paid. And I kind of understand that when you're not in that situation. But it doesn't start that way. So yeah, the way it starts is, you're on board and and it gets to the end of the month and you're expecting your pay, then you don't get paid. And then you start working and they tell you, oh, well, it's been delayed, but and then you think, okay, I'll start getting the next pay. And then you start waiting again, right? And then the next month goes through and you don't get any pay. And you're like, oh, crap. Now, if you leave, you're thinking, if I leave, am I going to get that money that they owe me? And maybe they'll pay me soon. You're not expecting it to go on much longer. So you're kind of in this limbo and you're working and you don't, maybe it's your first yacht and you don't want to upset anyone because you know what, it is a small industry and things, word gets out and stuff like that. There's lots of things that might be going through your head. Now, if you're on board a vessel for years and they're doing this and you're not getting paid for 6 months, then you get paid and then you're not getting paid for another 6 months, then I can see that there would be cause to find another job. And most people do. In fact, that vessel that I worked on, I left and a number of other people had left who'd been there for some years. And it's really bad for a yacht to lose people who've been there for quite some time, right? I wasn't there that long, really. I was there maybe 3 years. But some of the others have been there quite a number of years. We're talking 5, 6 years. So you're losing a lot of knowledge there, brain drain. But yeah, and you have this high turnover, so the vessel becomes less. In terms of the owner, the vessel is less. It's not as what's the word I'm looking for? The crew don't have the knowledge to do their job as good as the people who left, right? So you're putting yourself in a worse situation. Like in terms of the owner, they don't really see any of this stuff, but it can affect them if there's problems on board and the crew can't fix it engineering wise, or maybe the new second officer or the new captain crashes into something. These are effects. These are knock-on effects that you've had because of the conduct of your management for the vessel. You've lost the good captain who was there for years, and the new captain's come in and damaged the vessel. Now the vessel's going to come out of the water. And these are all based on experience, by the way. This has happened to me on yachts that I've worked on, where the captain has been backing out of a synchro lift in La Ciotat, and boom, he hit the side, damaged the vessel. So the vessel now needs to be repaired. Things like that, these were new captains, right? So they don't know the controls so well. They don't know the vessel as well. And because you're poor management, you've lost the brain. You have this brain drain. But in terms of the crew, they start off thinking, oh, I didn't get paid this month, but I'll get it next month, and it goes on like that. But then on that vessel, people got tired of it, and some people would come on board and they would work for 3 months, 4 months straight, no pay. So they've come on board. So in often terms, they're young people. They don't have any savings. They don't have any money. They come on board to work and then they don't get paid for 3 or 4 months. They can't afford it, because they've still got bills to pay and stuff like that. So it's a really bad situation. It's exceptionally rare for it to be that late. In my experience, I only ever, based on the feature video, I only worked on a few boats that was late with payments, and most of the other vessels were very good with it. But people will leave and they will go and find another job, because the last thing people want is to be constantly wondering if they're going to get paid. People have got mortgages and, all the other bills that people need to pay. And like I said, when I was in that situation, I was doing YouTube already, so I didn't have to worry about, I was still worried about the money, but I wasn't counting on the money like some people were. And I'm older as well, so, I wasn't in the same situation as a lot of the younger people who worked on board. Now, there are other boats out there right now where the crew are not getting paid. I can give you an example of one, Yacht Luminosity and Yacht Alfa Nero. There's a very public court case going on, but certainly with Alfa Nero, with a number of the crew sued the vessel. And now where it differentiates between on land is when you have a problem with a vessel, you sue the vessel and not, say, the owner or something like that. So it goes to that vessel and it's attached to that vessel. So even if the owner sold the vessel and that wasn't dealt with, the new owner of the vessel would have to deal with it. So it stays with the vessel. And in the terms of Alfa Nero, we reported on Superyacht News a while ago that they had already won their case where they were the court had agreed that they were owed this money. Now they still don't have the money, but when the vessel is sold, when the government of Antigua, if the government of Antigua finally gets permission to sell that vessel, once it's sold, a portion of that money will go to pay the crew what they're owed, the ones that sued in that lawsuit. And that is something that is taken very seriously. If a vessel is arrested, vessels can be arrested for that situation. So the crew that are on that boat right now, if they all hadn't been paid for 6 months and they decided to, they could go to the harbour master in the port, wherever they are. They could say, look, none of us have been paid for 6 months and we want to have the vessel arrested. And the vessel would be arrested and then the owner would have to pay. They'd all get fired, of course. But if it was that desperate and they wanted to, there's a surefire way of getting your money, and that is have that vessel arrested. But on the downside is that if you did it on your own, if you unilaterally went and have a vessel arrested, it could stick with you in the future, right? I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that if you had a vessel arrested and then you went and apply for another job somewhere else and somebody knew the story, then it could come back to hurt you a little bit. The industry is a small industry, and things that happen, word tends to spread, So it might. I'm not saying. Again, I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying it is a thing, and things spread. I'll give an example. When I was working on the cruise ships, I was contacted by an agency. They said they wanted me to go back to a cruise ship that I'd worked on years earlier. The cruise ship was going through a transition from it was leased by a cruise ship company, and the lease was expiring, and the cruise ship was coming out of that company. It was going to become an independent cruise ship company, and they needed somebody to oversee the change from the old one to the new one. So they needed someone who knew the old system and who could work on building this new system, right? So that's what I was brought in for. And the guy who was on board, who I was replacing, he didn't know he was being replaced, but he was, they were saying it wasn't working out with him. That's all they said. I don't know how this has happened, but he'd actually become quite aggressive with the captain of the vessel, of all the people that you could become aggressive with, the captain. And they were both from the same country. I don't know whether that had anything to do with it, but this guy had abused his position, basically, and he was being quite aggressive and rude and stuff like this. And I got brought in, he got fired. But what he'd done is, before he left, he damaged some fiber optic cables that joined one server room to another. And so the systems had completely failed, and one of the first things I had to do when I got there was fix this problem. He thought he'd get away with that, and maybe in the long run he did, but it's such a small industry, even the cruise ship industry. It's such a way that those kinds of things will follow you around, right? And for whatever reason, I always say it was a personality flaw of that guy. Like, regardless of what the captain said, he's the captain at the end of the day. And if I've been on boats where the captain's been a douchebag and I've not got along with him, and it's probably because of my military background. I've dealt with it in a way that I would have dealt with it in the military. The way the military taught you to deal with it. If you have a problem with someone, you go to your boss, right? And they say if your boss is the problem, then you go to his boss. Someone always has a boss, right? Except for the owner of the yacht, of course, he's the ultimate boss. But if you have a problem and the problem is with your captain, then you go to his boss, who is the owner. That's the way I dealt with my situation when I had a problem with the captain. But this guy, was taking it into his own hands, and he left. Now, fast forward 4 years or so, I'm working on the yachts now, and I'm recruiting for somebody to come on board. And I'm going through these CVs, and here's this guy, the same guy who I'd followed onto this cruise ship. I mean, I was there before him, but then I'd gone back to the cruise ship, and he damaged his cables, and here he was applying for a job on the boat I was on. And he'd even listed, I mean, just for confirmation, I recognized his name, but I confirmed it because he'd listed the cruise ship on his CV. And I thought, how crazy. Now, anybody who didn't check, this is why you should always check people's references, right? Because if it had been anybody else and they followed up and contacted the boat for the references, or the ship, the cruise ship, they would have written back and said, absolutely do not hire this guy because he's a lunatic, right? But I knew him. So he didn't get the job on my boat, at least. So, you know, it does follow you around. So, I mean, that's probably, maybe that was an exceptional circumstance, but at least one job he lost the possibility of getting because of his behavior, his past behavior, right? And that goes, this goes on to our next question. And is it possible that my last yacht put a bad word on me? I find it strange that I cannot find a yacht, even with all the skills needed, experience, and pluses that are requested in the industry. Now, the answer to that question is there's no blacklist. There's no like super yacht blacklist in the industry. There is a possibility. I mean, in the last episode of the podcast, I talked about this douchebag who ran a yacht management company who put a bad word, you know, who decided that he didn't like me, and basically every yacht that was in his yacht management company, it meant that I would never work on any of those yachts, right? So in that situation, I had it, but he doesn't have control of the whole industry, my point is. And he had probably 60 or 70 yachts on his books at the time. But in that situation, there was kind of a blacklist. Now, if this guy is applying for jobs within one yacht management company, then it's possible that he might be blacklisted in that company, right? If he's applying for different yachts, then no, it's not possible to happen. Now, what is possible is there is what I call the unofficial reference yacht CV reference system, and this has happened to me. And speaking of douchebags from the last episode, I worked on a yacht years ago with a douchebag, and his name is Dean. I'm not going to give you his last name, but I wanted to say his name out loud just in case he happens to be watching or listening to this podcast. Yes, you, Dean, you are a douchebag. And what happened is I applied for a job on a yacht. 5 years later, I worked with this guy for 3 years, right? And then 5 years later, I applied for a job on another yacht. I wasn't working with him anymore. I hadn't seen him for 5 years. And I applied for the job, and the chief engineer on board that vessel, he obviously looked down the list of places I'd worked, and he saw that I'd worked on this boat. So he contacted this guy because he obviously knew he'd worked there as well. So he contacted him and said, do you know this guy? Did you work with him? And this guy wrote back and gave me a poor reference for whatever reason. I mean, we didn't particularly get along so well, so probably that was part of the reason why he gave me a bad reference. But he said specifically, he told the guy that I was very good in one area or certain areas, but I wasn't good in this one particular area. But the thing is, we hadn't worked together for 5 years, right? So in 5 years' time, it's possible to learn a whole new skill set, right? You can do a degree in 5 years. You can do a degree in 3 years in the UK. But he's going around saying that I don't have these skills when, you know, he doesn't know me. He hasn't known me for 5 years. So I lost the opportunity to get that job because of this unofficial reference, right? So, because you have the official reference, right? You have to put your references on your CV, and then they contact the references. I've done this process in recruitment myself when I contact the references and you ask about somebody. And then you have this unofficial one, right? So they say, oh, I know a guy, you know, like even if that chief engineer doesn't know someone, he'll say to the other engineers, anyone know anyone who works on this boat? Oh, I know a guy who works on that boat. Or I know a guy who used to work on that boat. And then they go, boop, 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 and it goes down, you know, there's 6 degrees of separation. And then they go, yeah, I know this guy, blah, blah, blah. And then they say, do you know this guy? And then the word comes back. The problem is the word comes back. It could be from anyone, right? Like this douchebag, Dean Douchebag, we'll call him. He might not like me for whatever reasons. He might be jealous of me, my skills in other areas. So he says something for whatever reason. So yeah, that's not ideal. And that does happen. So I digress again. On another vessel, I was recruiting. We had this guy. I was recruiting for my opposite, and I wrote. The chief engineer asked me to write out to the references. This is going back a while, by the way. And he says, write out and ask for references. So I write to all the references, and we get 2 references back that say he's very good, blah, blah, blah. So I interview him, talk to him, seems okay. I'm not great at interviewing people. I'm not great at recruiting people, should I say. I thought I was good at interviewing people, but the few people I've recruited over the years turned out to not be so good. Not for technical reasons. I focus on technical when I do interviews, and sometimes you need to talk about other things, First question should be, are you a douchebag? Anyway, so we send them out. We send the email out. Okay, you got the job. You can start on this date. And then after we've offered him the job, the 3rd reference comes back and says he's very good, but he drinks a lot. So then I go to the chief engineer. We've already offered it because the chief didn't like recruiting, so he just deferred it to me, right? So I go to the chief and say, look, we've just got this in, and he goes, just delete it, because he doesn't want to deal with it, right? He's hired the guy. To him, it's like, okay, that job's done, right? And now I've come back with him with a problem. He says, just delete that email. So I deleted the email, and the guy turns up, and the guy was good, but he drank a lot, shockingly. So, and it affected the whole boat. It affected our department, because he would, when he was due back, he wouldn't turn up. He'd say, oh, I missed my flight. And, and then when he did turn up, he stunk of alcohol. So it seems like he just decided to stay in the pub for a couple of days longer. And, he would turn up drunk. So he was exactly what the references had said. He was good at his job, but he drank a lot. So I didn't stay there much longer after this guy was working there, because I didn't like the way the system was on that boat. But you can't ignore these things that people will say. So we did, and we paid for it. But that's what I call the unofficial reference system versus the official reference system. You'll always have that situation. So if you're working in the industry, you'll always have somebody who knows you from a previous job, or somebody who knows you, and stuff like that. And the word filters through that way, and it sucks, but that's what happens, All right, so I think I'm going to wrap it up there. I think we've gone on long enough. It's a little bit short, this video, but I think we've covered all the bases. If you've got any questions based on this, please be sure to put them below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening to it on the podcast, if you've got any concerns, by the way, if you work in the industry and you've got any concerns about your employment, anything we've talked on in this, or anything else that we haven't maybe talked on in this, if that story about the crew member who was being forced on board, who said she was being forced to stay on board, hits home with you, or if there's anything like that, be sure to contact us. You can get us at news@eastesman.co.uk. We any emails we get on these subjects, we hold them in the strictest of confidence. We'll never give out anybody's name who doesn't want that name to be given out. And there are thousands of people now who've contacted us in the past who will attest to that we've never given out the names of people who have said we want to remain anonymous or confidential, whatever. But if I would hate to think there's somebody out there working on a ship, or on a cruise ship, or a yacht, or a tanker, or anything, who feels like their rights are being, who feels like they're not being treated properly, or maybe even feel like they're being kept illegally on a ship, which is very unlikely in this modern age. But if for whatever reason, if you are in the situation and you feel you need help, you can contact us and we can advise you. And certainly, if it's a subject that we are unable to advise on, which is unlikely, but if we're not, then we'll get in touch with someone who can advise, and we will help you if you need it. So yeah, regardless of what the subject is, if you're working at sea and you're in the situation and you need help, then we are here to help. Like I said, we'll keep it anonymous. We won't talk about it on the channel. We won't mention it even in an anonymous story. if you say you don't want it to be mentioned, we'll never mention it. And like I said, there are plenty of people out there who can attest to. Obviously, they won't because they want to stay anonymous. But there are lots of people out there who've contacted us in the past, and they've told us a story, and then before we've actually gone with the story, they've said, "Oh," they've contacted us and said, "Oh, actually, it's been resolved now. Please don't say anything." And we've said, "Okay," and we've not said anything, and we've just filed that one away and not dealt with it and not covered the story because they've asked us not to. So, we understand the industry. We're not like if you contacted Bloomberg or somebody like that who doesn't understand this industry that we work in. We're not going to just use you as a story and then just, whatever. We don't care what happens to you. We're not like that at all. We understand. If you're not getting paid, that's another one, right? There is recourse, like I said. You can have the vessel arrested as an absolute last resort. I would say that is because you will, if you ever had a vessel arrested for non-payment, then you're going to struggle to get on another boat because that will follow you around. And I'm not saying it should be like that. I'm not saying that I'm not taking sides. I'm just saying that you can guarantee that will follow you around if you were to do that. So, but if you haven't been paid for 6 months and then and you're in a situation where you're going to get thrown out of your apartment where you live, or your mortgage is going to be the bank's going to take your house back or something like that. That's a last resort, and yeah, absolutely do that, and your money will be with you lickety split like that, because once the owner finds out he can't have his yacht where he wants it, then he's going to pay you your money, but you're also going to get a flight home as well. So, but yeah. If you're having a problem and you want to talk to somebody, you can contact us. Anyway, I think I've made that point, so I'm going to leave it there. Let us know what you think of the podcast. Like I said, if you've got any ideas for future podcasts, we had some great ones from some people from the last podcast that we're talking about doing some, like, everyone loves the top 10. One guy said, and so we might do something like that in a future podcast. Talk about the 5 largest yachts in the world or 5 fastest yachts or something like that. But if you've got any other ideas for podcasts, please put them below. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, etc., be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And yeah, leave your feedback below, and I'll catch up with you soon, guys. All right, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.